Okay, so today we're going to get into something that really changed the entire country. We're talking about the Great Migration.
Right.
Yeah.
It's this huge movement of people over almost 60 years. Millions of African Americans moving and completely reshaping where and how they lived.
And this wasn't just a small trend. We're talking about a fundamental shift.
It's massive. It
Yeah.
starts around 1916, and it goes on really until about 1970. 6 million people moving from the rural South to cities in the North and West. I mean, that changes the map of the United States forever.
So our goal today is to really understand the why behind it all.
hmm
What was pushing people out with such force and what was pulling them toward a new, uncertain life.
Exactly. What was the engine behind this incredible change?
So to understand the push, you have to start with life in the South.
You absolutely have to. And that means talking about Jim Crow, these were just, unspoken rules. These are actual laws, a whole legal system of racial segregation.
Separate everything.
Everything. Separate schools, parks, water fountains, hospitals. And the key thing to remember is that the facilities for black people were always, always unequal, underfunded, and just neglected.
And this was reinforced by the economy, right? It wasn't just social.
Oh, absolutely. The economic system was a trap. Most African Americans were sharecroppers.
Which means they worked land owned by someone else, usually a white landlord.
Right. They'd work all year, grow the crops, usually cotton, and then get a small share of the profit at the end.
But they never actually saw much of that money, did they?
Almost never, because of a system. Or, well, they had to buy everything on credit from a landlord store. Seeds, tools, even food.
At inflated prices, I assume?
Exactly. So by the end of the year, after the cotton was sold, the landlord would say, okay, here's what you owe me. And the debt was almost always more than the share they had earned.
So you start the next year even further behind.
It was a cycle of debt you could never escape. You were legally tied to that land until the debt was paid. And since the landlord kept the books, it was never paid.
Yeah. And then on top of that economic trap, nature itself kind of steps in.
Yeah, a couple of major disasters. First, there were huge floods that just ruined the land. But the real knockout punch was an insect. The boll weevil.
A beetle, right?
A small beetle that eats cotton. It just marched across the South and completely destroyed the one crop the entire system depended on.
So if the cotton's gone.
The landlord has no income, and the sharecropper has no work, no food, and no way to survive. It made staying physically impossible for millions.
Wow. And then there's the issue of just personal safety.
Yes,
This
this is crucial. There was no real protection from the justice system. The threat of violence was always there, whether it was from lynchings or just being arrested unfairly. Leaving wasn't just for a better job. For many, it was about survival.
So the South is becoming impossible to live in. What finally opens the door to leave?
War. The timing is perfect, in a way. World War I starts in Europe,
And the U.S. starts ramping up production for the war effort.
massively. Factories, steel mills, assembly lines, they all go into overdrive. But they have a huge labor problem.
Why is that?
2 reasons. Immigration from Europe basically stops because of the war, and at the same time, white workers are being drafted to go fight.
So you have all these new jobs opening up and nobody to fill them.
Exactly. A huge labor vacuum, especially in cities like Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh.
And so these companies, what, they actually send people down south to find workers?
You did. Recruiters from steel mills, from meatpacking plants, they went south. And they weren't just offering a job, they were offering, well, a fortune by comparison.
Let's talk about the numbers because this is just staggering.
Okay, so a sharecropper might, on a very good day, clear the equivalent of $1, often less.
If they weren't going deeper into debt.
Right. These northern factories were offering $3, $4, even $5 a day.
$5 a day, that's life-changing money.
It's everything. It means you can actually save money. You can buy a home, buy decent clothes for your family. That idea alone was more powerful than the fear of moving somewhere completely new.
And how did the word spread?
It was a chain reaction, really. Often the men would go up first,
Find a job, get settled.
get that first paycheck, and then immediately send money back home to buy train tickets for their wife and kids to join them.
So it's very personal, family by family.
And it was amplified by the black press. Newspapers like the Chicago Defender were huge. They would publish articles about all the opportunities. They'd list train schedules.
So they were basically advertising a new life.
They were. They presented it as a kind of modern-day exodus. And these papers were smuggled south and passed from person to person. It was a call to action.
So at its core, it was really about hope.
It was hope for a future where you had choices. Better pay, yes, but also a hope that your children could get real education and escape the system their parents were trapped in. That was the real engine.
And that journey itself must have been an incredible ordeal.
It was. Most people traveled by train, which could take several days. And remember, they were often leaving in a hurry, sometimes escaping debt, so they traveled light,
Just a suitcase or whatever they could carry.
pretty much. And they're all heading, in that first wave anyway, to these huge industrial cities.
We're talking Chicago, Detroit, New York City, Philadelphia.
Right. And you have to imagine the shock. You step off the train from, say, rural Alabama, and you're in the middle of Chicago. The tall buildings, the noise, the sheer number of people.
It's a different planet.
A completely different planet. But what's amazing is how quickly they built communities.
Because they tended to settle together, right?
Yeah, partly out of necessity and partly for support. And these neighborhoods became these vibrant centers of culture and business. That's how we get places like Harlem in New York or the South Side of Chicago.
Places where you could build a life that was just impossible back south.
And you had new freedoms. I mean, there were no Jim Crow laws on the books. You could vote without poll taxes or literacy tests. You could sit anywhere on a streetcar.
That feeling of just basic freedom must have been immense.
It was huge. Even with all the challenges they would face, that initial feeling was powerful.
And you mentioned the dream for the kids. Did that pay off with education?
It really did. The schools in the North were, generally better funded. They stayed open for the full year. They had more books, more resources. For parents, that was everything. That was the proof that the journey was worth it.
Okay, so it sounds like the North was this land of opportunity, but it wasn't that simple, was it?
No, not at all. The dream ran into a very harsh reality pretty quickly.
So what was the problem?
The North didn't have Jim Crow laws, but it absolutely had segregation. It was what we call de facto segregation. Segregation by custom and practice, not by law.
So people still faced unfair treatment.
Constantly. And as more and more people arrived, many white residents reacted with fear, which led to a lot of tension and even riots.
And housing was a major issue.
A huge issue. Landlords would refuse to rent to black families outside of very specific crowded neighborhoods. They used legal tricks to enforce this.
You mean things like restrictive covenants?
Exactly. Clauses in property deeds that said the house could not be sold to or rented by African Americans. It forced everyone into these small, confined areas.
And the apartments would get incredibly crowded.
Terribly crowded. Whole families in a single room sometimes. And because landlords knew their tenants had nowhere else to go, they didn't bother with repairs or upkeep. This is the beginning of what we later called redlining.
And what about those great factory jobs? Did they offer a path up?
Not always. The wages were good, yes, but advancement was often blocked. A lot of the powerful trade unions wouldn't allow black members.
So you could get a job on the assembly line, but you couldn't become a supervisor or a skilled tradesman.
Right. You were often stuck in the hardest, dirtiest, most dangerous jobs with no real future.
But out of all this pressure, something incredible happens.
Something absolutely incredible. You get this concentration of talent, ambition, and creative energy, and it just explodes.
The Harlem Renaissance?
The Harlem Renaissance. Starting in the 1920s, it was this explosion of African-American art, music, and literature.
A new sense of pride and identity.
Exactly. Writers like Langston Hughes started telling the real stories of their lives. Artists were painting the world around them. And the music was transformative.
This is where jazz and blues really take off, right?
Yeah, the blues that came up from the Mississippi Delta, which was acoustic and very personal.
It becomes electric blues in Chicago.
It gets amplified to be heard over the noise of the city. And jazz becomes the soundtrack of this new urban life, mixing all these different cultures and sounds in the clubs of New York and Chicago. It becomes America's first truly global art form.
Now, you mentioned waves, so this first wave eventually slows down.
It does. When the Great Depression hits in the 1930s, all those factory jobs in the North just disappear. So the migration slows to a trickle.
But it doesn't end.
Not for long, because then comes World War II, and that kicks off a second wave, which was even bigger than the first.
Driven by the defense industry this time.
Right, and the geography expands. People are still going to Chicago and Detroit, but now they're also heading west.
To the West Coast.
To Los Angeles, Oakland, Seattle. Jobs in shipyards and airplane factories opened up, and the demand for workers was so huge that old racial barriers started to crack, just a little. This second wave lasts all the way into the 1970s.
So what did this mean for the South? I mean, they lost 6 million people.
It completely changed the South. Landowners couldn't rely on that cheap, exploited labor anymore. They were forced to mechanize.
So machines started doing the work that people used to do?
Yes, especially with the invention of the mechanical cotton picker. It basically ended the sharecropping system for good and broke the economic structure that held up Jim Crow.
So in a way, the people who left helped bring about change for the people who stayed.
It's a huge factor, and it changed national politics. All of a sudden, you had millions of new black voters in key northern states, and they became a political force that couldn't be ignored.
When you look back at it, it's just one of the most important stories in American history.
Absolutely. It was a massive act of people deciding their own future, demanding their rights, and risking everything for the chance at a better life for their children.
So the Great Migration was really this long, determined search for freedom and opportunity, and it ended up completely redefining America's cities, culture, and even its politics.
And think about this. No matter where you live, think about the music you hear on the radio or the history of your own city. How much of that might trace all the way back to the single brave choice a family made to pack a bag and get on a train 100 years ago?
Keep studying hard and exploring history. See you next time.